So hello, everyone, and welcome to this seminar, Central of Global Finance Seminar, regular seminar. My name is Hong Bo. I'm a professor in financial economics at the School of Finance and Management at SOAS. So today I'm going to be in Victor's normal place to chair this session. And because Victor is going to at least to lead the presentation among other co-authors. So I think today, as you can see that the topic is about natural resources curves, which we have heard quite a lot, particularly when they are talking about countries like African countries that are rich in resources. And nowadays we can think of maybe countries in Central Asia. They are very rich in resources as well, and in MENA countries. So I think the topic actually is relevant if you apply them to other countries, other economies as well. And the natural resource curse problem actually exists in a lot of different places. So I think today the paper, as far as I can see, is going to make the connection between oil market and financial system, but from the perspective of natural resources curves. So I'm very interested in this topic. So the paper is actually, Victor, are you going to introduce your co-authors probably?
Yes.
If that is because they are not here, right? So there's no point for me to introduce them one by one. So I understand this is a co-authored paper, and I understand you are going to lead the presentation. Why don't we just start the presentation? So I give the floor to you, and I hope you can introduce your co-authors at least a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong, and thank you all colleagues who are at this meeting today. As Hong mentioned, this is a joint paper with the Dr. Morakinyo Adetutu from the School of Business and Economics at Loughborough, and also Dr. John Ebireri, who is at Nottingham Business School, and with the Dr. Kayode Odusanya, who is also at Loughborough University in the School of Business and Economics, together with Morakinyo. Now, my colleagues Akin, John, and Kayode, if they are not, they possibly in the audience or will be arriving in the audience as we go. And so this will be a drama whereby I go through the paper, and they can chip in as we go, either during the presentation or later after my presentation when we come to the question and answer. Now, let me say that this is work in progress, and would like to invite all the comments and constructive suggestions so that this work can survive the next round of revise and resubmit. Now, this work is in the context of oil booms, and the journey of this presentation will be standard from the introduction, prior research, or empirical strategy, the data and discrete statistics, the empirical results, and then our concluding remarks with the policy implications and pointing out ideas for further research. So it's more or less the pedestrian route of standard presentation. But in terms of the substance of the presentation, most of the issues presented here are not new, have been running in the literature for quite a number of years. But I think the most succinct way of summarizing the issue comes in the title of Anthony Venables in the Journal of Economic Perspectives in 2016, when the title saying, Using Natural Resources for Development. Why has it proven so difficult? Why is it really so difficult that countries rejoice when they discover oil and other natural resources, but a couple of years down the road, 10 years down the road, development has not fundamentally changed, and transformation is still eluding those countries. And we can get many countries from across the world, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America. We get those examples whereby natural resources are not necessarily leading to development. Why is it so difficult? And so that paper is asking a question that so far had been running the literature, but since 2016, it has been addressed in many ways. I say it's been running in the literature because it comes, the clear statement, and especially the theory, goes back to the work of Kayode and Nire in Economic Journal in 1982, where they refer to the Dutch disease or the resource curse hypothesis. Basically, the hypothesis, stating that, increased export revenues from rising commodity prices tend to cause the real exchange rate to appreciate. And because of exchange rate appreciation and other factors, basically exports become difficult, and especially for manufacturers and for even for agriculture. And so the tradable sector of the economy is crowded out. And so that the discovery of natural resources, rather than becoming a blessing for development, becomes a curse. And of course, there are many dimensions. Of course, even if you look at it in terms, the sharp increase in foreign exchange inflows and unexpectedly leading to, as policymakers rejoice, the natural resource boom leading to contractions in the tradable sector of these natural resource countries. And in fact, in 2010, a working paper, the IMF, by Ismail, showed some rough quantitative estimates, which demonstrate that a 10% increase in the size of a commodity boom is associated with a 3.4 percentage fall in manufacturing value added. And so this is just a rough number. And this number holds true, when you change samples. So this is, a critical issue, a burning problem, and one reason why we come to it. But maybe we need to consider the issue in terms of where we are now with research in this particular area. Now, this paper builds on the financial economics tradition, whereby we look at the banking sector as the center of the flow of funds around an economy. And in particular, the role of banks in the flow of funds. And here, banks play an important role in terms of, say, the various assets, but in particular, balancing the surplus sectors with the deficit sectors. And one would assume that if the natural resource discovery or natural resource boom leads into a lot of foreign exchange inflows that go into the government sector, that eventually trickles into households or in two companies, the banking sector should be able to intermediate this, especially through loans that are distributed throughout the economy. And therefore, the bank credit should play an important role in the flow of funds to be able to even out the imbalances that may be created by natural resource flows. This is what theory would lead us to think. Okay, now is it the case? And that's what we're going to find out also by looking into other dimensions of the literature or previous research in this particular area. But let us just look at a couple of findings and the emphasis from this literature, especially the long literature on resource scarce hypothesis. This identifies about three channels. For example, the crowding out effect. The work by Sheriff in 2013, Cass in 2019 shows how natural resource revenues crowd out some certain sectors. So that's one channel of crowding out. But also there is the channel and the role played by weak institutions, where institutions are weak in governance, that this amplifies the natural resource scarce effect. And this has been documented by Miriam 2006, further work by Bhattacharya and Hodler, and also work by Rajan and Ibrahim, very well documented about the role of weak institutions. But there is also the finding that looks at the natural resource scarce in terms of fragility, in terms of leading to armed conflict. And actually, this paper, do by the fact said, the mine is mine, meaning the mineral, the mine of minerals is mine, and leading to a conflict and a armed conflict and fragility, the economic fragility, and this has been documented. Dubin and Vargas in 2013, Gotet and Sui, the same paper, and then recent work by Mama in terms of how the armed conflicts are sustained by natural resources, clear causality running from natural resources and traced into armed conflicts, and many examples given in this literature. Now, in addition to this, there is another strand of literature that brings into calling for a new research. This calls pronounced in the work by Adib 2017, calling for new research that explores the exact mechanism, through which mechanisms are natural resources affecting economic outcomes, especially economic outcomes in terms of economic growth. Okay. And two linkages here linking to economic growth. One is the work by Beck, in which there are linkages between natural resource exploitation and financial sector and development. And the paper by Beck in 2016 said this is very well, under-researched. And there are quite a number of papers now that are building on this work, including the work with the ongoing work with Sandrine and Asina. But also the work by Joland in 2019 and others in 2019, it says there's need for better understanding of crowding effects and the community booms, especially the heterogeneity in which the crowding out effects occur. It is in that context that we think that there is indeed, as Adebo pointed out, calling for new research, the need for extended literature. And we try to build on that by extending the literature, investigating the one unexplored question, and actually two unexplored questions of whether commodity booms affect the tradable and non-tradable sectors' share of bank credit, and how this occurs. Okay, so we are looking at the role of banks, if we go back to the flow of funds model, but trying to disentangle the heterogeneous effect between the tradable and then non-tradable sector of the economy, depending on how banks lend to various sectors in the economy. Okay, so this is one thrust of trying to build on this long literature and trying to look for a dimension in which we could add some value added. But perhaps we should look also closely at this strand of literature, which is at the intersection of natural resource costs and finance. Okay. Now, some of the earlier work, especially by Beck, by Bhattacharya and Hodder 2014 paper that I referred to earlier, this strand of literature links the low levels of financial development in resource-dependent countries to the natural resource costs. So, financial development becomes very, very difficult, very elusive, in actual fact, because of the natural resource costs. But there has also been some of the recent microeconometric work on how the commodity price dynamics affect bank level productivity. And my co-authors and I did a paper in 2020 published in Economic Letters, in which we use bank level data to show clearly that the natural resource costs can actually affect directly bank level productivity, the productivity within the banking sector. Some other authors have also looked at the micro level, showing that it does affect lending, especially the work by Garwar 2020. Some other work has also shown using, again, bank level data, that the commodity price dynamics can affect stock return risks using, say, a market model of stock returns. Ma and others in 2021 point to this. And of course, also can point to a bank stability or bank fragility, the work by Kind and others in 2016. So there has been some emphasis of how the natural resource costs can translate into a bank level performance, and especially looking at using microeconometric work or bank level data. Now, we argue on the basis of this that if we look at the role of banks in the context of providing external finance to firms, which is a standard corporate finance argument, that we would need to look, give another dimension of the bank activities in terms of their sector allocation of lending, so that we are looking at the sector shares of bank lending in commodity-rich economies. So, how much bank lending is going into agriculture, is going into manufacturing, is going into services, for example. And so we can then be able to distinguish between the tradable sector and the non-tradable sector, and see how the natural resource cost is reflected in the credit, bank credit allocation of and linked to natural resource costs. And so in this context, our study makes also a methodological contribution by exploiting carefully the high intensity monthly sectoral credits shares across 16 oil producing countries during the period 1995-2017. And we are therefore accounting for about 51% of global oil production in our sample. This is a lot of hand collection, painstaking work to be able to come to shed more light specifically on the extension of flow of funds and looking at the sectoral bank credit shares. And in addition to the three main contributions, we mentioned our three main contributions, the literature. We also can mention a contribution in terms of some the new findings that we uncover. And I'll just highlight these before I even go into the paper, just to be sure that the storyline of the paper is very clear. Our analysis uncovers some three interesting results. We find very robust evidence that the variations in the sectoral credit shares by banks during oil booms really translates into a natural resource cost in oil-rich countries. It's another manifestation. By looking at the sectoral bank credit shares, we find another manifestation of the natural resource cost in oil-rich countries. And basically, this is another consistency with the natural resource cost hypothesis, and specifically that oil booms have a strong negative impact on manufacturing sector, which is a tradable sector, but also a strong positive effect on oil and services, share of bank credits, which is the non-tradable sector, so that our results can actually distinguish the heterogeneity, the different results, the dichotomy of the results within tradable and non-tradable sectors. And we also emphasize in our results that these findings remain intact. They do not alter, even after trying for a battery of sensitive checks and robustness checks that we shall demonstrate in this paper. We therefore say, to the best of our knowledge, the analysis in this paper is the first one to document that there is a strong nexus between oil booms and sectoral bank credit, and that this nexus is in itself a manifestation of the natural resource cost in resource endowed economies. And that's what we think to be the main contribution of this work. Okay, let me then take an excursion into the empirical strategy that we use for this paper. We just try to use a simple but tractable empirical strategy so that we don't go around the, just to make it straight and simple and possibly easy to understand. So the strategy we use is to just pin down empirically the relationship between oil price booms and sectoral bank credit shares. And we specify and estimate initially the baseline panel data regression model that is reflected here in equation 1. And if I can use my cursor here, whereby we have the bank credit share of sector K in country I at time t. And now this is regressed on a dummy, that a alpha I, that captures any time invariant effects that affect sector bank credit shares. And alpha T is a time dummy that captures the effects of national and global economic and political events, and on and on. And then our variable of emphasis, the boom, where the boom here is the oil boom variable. And then we have Z, a vector of control variables, including those that traditionally should appear in a model that studies the credit share of bank credit shares. And that's our simple model. It's a baseline model. And we shall see ways in which we go around modifying the baseline model. So basically here, gamma associated with boom is the parameter of interest. It's the parameter which is measuring the extent to which oil booms influence sectoral bank credit shares. So that's a simple baseline model. Okay. In terms of empirical strategy, we do appreciate the possibility of potential endogeneity of the oil boom variable in our specification. So we use an instrumental variable approach to address this challenge. And specifically, we employ two-stage least squares approach by instrumenting for the boom variable, whereby we first do a first-stage regression of the boom variable on a number of variables, and in particular, identify two variables. One, a conflict at time t minus 1, and the second, disaster t minus 1. These represent the sum of out-of-region casualties from armed conflict, that's the conflict variable, and the monetary damages that arise from natural disasters across oil-producing regions is now presented here as disasters. So basically what we're trying to do here is to map out and model the instruments that we can use in the instrumental variable approach. Now, also an important component of our empirical strategy is the painstaking data collection that we involved in. And we take our raw data from a number of sources, and which we check also for consistency. First of all, the OPSLA Conflict Data Program, UCDP, used also in other forms of literature, and the DAT disasters database, which are able to pick some of these variables we have used in their instrumental in deriving the instruments. So the identifying assumption is that the two IVs, conflict and disaster, both impose significant disruption of global oil supply, causing significant oil price swings. And this assumption, the identifying assumption here, at least in theory, is strongly evidenced by previous work that document geopolitical conflicts and climate disasters' impact on energy markets and prices. And here quite a number of papers by Conado 2020, Lee's work, Lee and others 2021, and Wen and others 2021 or so. But also there is an interesting paper by Economy in supply, who looks at the supply side events leading to oil price swings. And all these studies are actually just justification of the assumption or corroborating the assumption that we use here for the two variables. And to construct these two instruments, we first map the events to oil producing areas using the ICPD data we mentioned earlier, and the EM data disasters database, which is actually express the location factor, the georeferences and the province information are collected by satellite. Now, in working out these two IVs, we follow the work of Ramsey using the sum of out-of-region values. And this approach is novel because it allows us to invoke the identifying assumption that conflict last year, T-1, and disaster, T-1, are orthogonal to the error term, since which country in our sample, the invest used in the IV coming from oil-producing countries, including those countries that are actually not in our sample with generality. But also, we try to work around these variables, the IV variables, by trying to explore the lagged values of the variables, hence trying to make exogeneity, quite likely in our empirical investigations. Okay. But let me also, to just extend this, let me also, given that we covered the empirical strategy, let me focus more on our data, especially the data sources, data collection, and the partitioning of the data. Our main unit of observation, as identified as stated in the model, and the model specification, in the national level of sectoral bank credit shares across 16 oil-producing countries during the period 1995-2017. But how did we get there? How did we get? We moved scientifically and systematically. We explore and try to use our higher frequency monthly data to capture the volatile nature of oil prices. We started with the annual data, but we noted that the volatility is not so high. We needed high frequency data. And so we construct a novel monthly data set that draws information from over 1,000 editions of central bank statistical bulletins. And from this, we are able to work generate the sample that yields an unbalanced panel data containing 2,310 observations. Of course, we first go wide. We first identify, compare a list of 41 oil-dependent countries during the World Commodity Exporters Database, WCED, and also comparing with the data that Anthony Venables used in the 2016 paper. We deflate all monetary values 2015, and that's the base period 2015 equal to 0. Prices using monthly US Consumer Price Index from the IMF IFS database. And these deflated variables are then converted to international prices. Here we apply the purchasing power parity conversion factors also available in the IFS databases. Now, perhaps we should just to highlight these variables so that it's very clear once we go into the estimation results, it becomes very clear which variables used. Say, for example, the endogenous variable, which is the bank credit share. Here we are looking at the manufacturing sector share of credit, whereby we are measuring this the ratio of total banking sector loans to manufacturing sector compared to total loans. And then the service sector share of credit, take out the ratio of total banking sector loans to services sector, the loans to services sector as a ratio of total loans. And then the oil sector credit share, the ratio of total banking sector loans to oil sector as a ratio to total loans. Okay, so these three variables are the variables of our interest for the dependent variable in the empirical model we specified and mentioned, highlighted earlier. And then we have the variable of interest, which is the boom, measured here, the oil price boom, the spot oil price deviations from 3-month oil futures. So as I will explain shortly, we are looking at both the spot price, the spot oil price, and also the oil futures. Then we also are looking at the real interest rate. We have a version of a covered and uncovered interest parity conditions. So we have real interest rate, an average monthly lending rate. Then we have also the capitalization variable among the controls. And here looked at the ratio of total bank sector equity, total assets, a size, measured total assets. Of course, some in the banking literature, they measure size in terms of a number of employees, but we just want to stick the corporate finance dimension of the banking literature. And also liquidity in terms of loan to deposits. We also create some demos to distinguish opaque members from non-opaque members. So we have a dummy variable equal to 1 if the country is a member of OPEC and 0 otherwise. But we also have to reflect the purchasing managers index, which is very much used in the literature, the PMI. And of course, we also take into account the institutional quality measure variable as the voice and accountability index from the world governance indicators. And here is, of course, the sources which are kind of standard. And the instrumental variables I highlighted a minute ago are the two instrumental variables: conflict, the sum of casualties from out-of-country armed conflict around oil communities, and then the natural disaster variable, a monetary sum out of region disaster damages for producing countries. And the data sources I mentioned earlier, the UCPD and the GLIDE database. So this is a summary of the variables we used. I paused here because it may well be the case that one of the comments in the audience will be about the variables we use and suggestions on the variables that we are using if we are missing a big elephant in the measurement of the variables in the literature. Okay, now just briefly to highlight the first stage of a data analysis, which is the descriptive statistics. We find it's very interesting to actually look at the way the data and why we think that the insight from bank credit shares is interesting. Now, if you look at this data whereby we have 16 countries in our sample, these are the 16 countries of our sample, and we look at the share of world oil production in column 3, we see that the highest shares are by Russia, 12.2, and Saudi Arabia, 13.4. But also, these countries have high shares in terms of oil share of total exports, 51 for Russia and 79, almost 80 for Saudi Arabia. Now, in the interesting aspect, the bank credit shares, right, are not necessarily high for those countries that have high shares of world oil production. Say Russia, which has highest at 12.2, 13.4. The bank credit to private sector is 59.9. And for Saudi Arabia, 57.9. Whereas the highest share, okay, could be for example, for Bahrain and Brazil, where their shares of oil production is not necessarily very high. Okay, so it's interesting to see how the share of world oil production and the share of the oil share in total exports does not necessarily not translating into bank credit to private sector. Why? Why does this happen? Okay, and this is one of the at the back of the contention of why we find it very interesting to investigate this aspect. And so now, what is it we're trying to capture in the sectoral bank credit variable? We are trying to capture the variations in a sector share of the banking credit, total credit, share of the banking sector compared to total credit. We construct this variable from a central bank statistical operator I mentioned. And here is the statement of the formula that we use basically, whereby here CR share is the credit share of sector I in country I period T. And we are basically summating in L the total bank credit system, loans and advances to sector K at time, in the country I at time T. And we are summating that as a share of the total loans across all the sectors in the economy. So this is our computation. Okay. This could be modified. We could be modified. We could produce some uncertainty here that may be again, this is called possible extension, but this is the one we use. And We also are paying attention to the distinction, the dichotomy between the tradable sector and the non-tradable sector. In our analysis, the tradable sector is manufacturing, okay? And we shall try to explore as a robustness test, a substitute say manufacturing with agriculture. But the baseline is manufacturing. And the non-tradable sector here is services. Okay. So, however, as we also include great shares of petroleum sector for comparative analysis here on the non-tradable sector. And as I mentioned, we also look at agriculture. So we're interested in how the central bank rate shares, and so we can capture the evolution of the relative importance of the tradable sector vis-a-vis the tradable sector in the bank rate allocation across the sampled banking sectors. And in terms of the independent variables, as mentioned, summarized on that table, in the oil boom, we conceptually define the oil boom as periods when the actual market prices substantially exceed expected prices. So we have expectations and spot values. So hence, that's where we are computing the oil boom variable, taking the value of 1 if actual oil prices exceed expected prices and 0 otherwise. Okay. And we treat a monthly spot oil prices as actual oil prices. They are spot and they're actual. Whereas the real 3 months oil futures employed as a proxy for expected values, just to distinguish between our spot and expected values. And we base on the literature whereby oil futures reliably capture market operators' Russian expectations, and also the views about future spot prices. And this were documented in the literature by a number of papers, including in our recent paper in the economics letters in 2020. Now, I share with you the plot of spot and futures prices, and especially to demonstrate what happened along certain interesting features. So the plot in black is the spot prices, real, and then the one, the colored one, is the oil futures. And of interest here is to see around variables of periods of interest, say around the Asian financial crisis, okay, the Asian financial crisis, when you find when there's a sharp fall in the spot prices compared to the forecast that was very high. And then also the boom following the boom that follows in the period from 2001, which was only disrupted by the global financial crisis, and you see the sharp fall in the spot prices. And of course, the picks up the boom that happens and consistent, of course, with the Arab, uprising in which the actual values went up and actually surpassed the oil futures. And of course, now with the period then falling about 2015 due to excess capacity and strong supply and stagnant demand in the world economy. And so you can see this is based on the Energy Information Administration AIA and featured in the work of Cornell in 2016, which captures this evolution. But importantly, shows that our emphasis or focus on looking at the difference between spot price and oil futures, that they are very well, it's very well informed and very well guided. Okay. What about the control variables? Why do we select the control variables? We, as a standard practice in the literature, we take the control variables from the high prestige papers in the literature, whereby we control for a number of banking sector specific and also a number of macroeconomic variables. For macroeconomic variables or conditions, we use the Purchasing Managers Index as a proxy, used in some of the previous literature. And also we look at the real interest rate as a capture of the role of monetary policy. In terms of the bank level variables, we have mentioned capitalization, the equity ratio for capital risk. We also mentioned the loan to deposit ratio to capture intermediation and liquidity risk, and also the exchange rate to capture currency movements, and then the control for opaque, and then voice unlockability, which I mentioned in the table that I shared with you. Now, in terms of the now the discrete statistics, this time looking at the variables we are using in the regression. First of all, we find that the petroleum sector share of credit is not trivial. It stands at about 14.352, and where the maximum is actually 2.7. So it's not a trivial. It's really a trivial component, and actually, and then we also look also at the share of the manufacturing sector in bank credit at 12.2, maximum was 3.7. We find that these values we get for the variables we have are quite rational. We don't expect any big outliers from this distribution.
Victor,
yes.
We agreed that you only have 1 hour. It's a few minutes to go. So can you please finish it within 1 hour?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Okay, so we've seen the statistics, and basically what is interesting is that the mean value of manufacturing share 0.2 with a standard deviation 6.87 compared to 46.7 for the services sector. Okay, and these are the two sectors we're interested in. That is the services sector share of credit is almost 4 times larger than manufacturing share of credit. And basically, we see in that data already some diagnostic symptoms of the Dutch disease phenomenon. Okay. Now, what about the empirical? Now, let me share with you the empirical results, since in the interest of time. What we look at here in the this is the baseline estimation of results. Now, we have equations 1 and 2. One is estimated by ordinary squares, but we know there is a problem with that estimation technique. The second is instrumental variables, and that's what we focus on. Here we are looking at the share of a bank credit to a manufacturing, the share of bank credit to oil, the share of a bank credit to services sector. The sector oil and services are non-tradable, manufacturing is tradable. And our variable interest is the boom. We find that basically the boom has a statistically significant and viable as hypothesized impact on manufacturing share of credit. So basically, the boom tends to reduce the bank credit share going into the manufacturing sector. It has therefore has negative effects. However, this is not true of oil and services. So we find that actually the negative impact of the boom, or the oil source boom, is on manufacturing, the tradable sector, rather than the non-tradable sector. Now, the other variables of interest are behaving as expected. Okay. Now, we also modify this just to explain how we dealt with, again, our results on endogeneity, and also try to see that when we try the Hostman tests, we get a test statistic of 62.27, the chi-square of 0, rejecting the narrow hypothesis that the boom variable is exogenous at conventional levels. This is why, therefore, we pay more attention to the IV estimation approach rather than the ordinary squares approach. And so in the results we show and the ones that will follow, our analysis, the results we take seriously are those obtained from the two-stage squares, since they are more efficient and consistent compared to their ordinary squares counterpart. We also check the good instruments who possess a relevance and validity, and we obtain results which are very reassuring that the variables for conflict and disaster have the expected positive sign, and they are significant. And this is the results were sum up that the instruments we use in our results are actually credible, and we can go ahead and use them for instrumentation in our estimation results. Okay. Now, just to get furthermore about, now these are the control variables. Basically, a discussion here is take each of the control variables and show that they behave as expected, okay, as consistent with the literature, so that our focus is primarily on the boom variable, the variable of interest. Okay. We also go one extra mile and undertake robustness checks to say, suppose it is argued for the sake of argument that our results are just only maybe just by chance, it's happened, or just that our results seem to support the oil boom impact on the tradable sector. No, we do undertake various three main checks on variable definition, on mode assumptions, on the data sample. So on the measurement, on the variable definition, we explore alternative measures of the boom variable. Okay, and so here we follow the Planté and Diwali in 2017, whereby they construct and use an alternative boom measure derived at the percentage deviation between actual and expected oil prices, which is what I was covering when I was trying to show the plot that actually there are differences between the actual, the spot, and the predicted or the expected futures price. And so we reconfigure our boom measure now, basing on this new variable, and then retest our model. Okay, and when we use that boom measure, we still get the results consistent with the previous results, whereby we have a negative significant impact on the manufacturing share of bank credit and a positive effect on oil share and services sector, which are non-exportable. So these results are statistically and qualitatively consistent with baseline model, and although the coefficients are much larger than those in the baseline. Okay, and supporting our initial assessment that sectoral credit shares during oil booms embody a resource curse phenomenon. We also try to do a robustness check by changing the tradable sector. In the previous results, the tradable sector was manufacturing. But we know that in some small countries, the agriculture sector is larger than the manufacturing sector. And so it is likely that the agriculture sector is a better representation of the tradable sector in those developing countries. So we designate the agriculture sector, the alternative tradable sector, and use the credit shares of this sector as our alternative dependent variable in the regression. And we report the results here, whereby the boom measure is to explore the agriculture sector, dimension of the tradable sector, and we find again a strong result that support the. We these all are reported, but as we mentioned before, these are the results that benefit from the instrumentation, the instruments we designed. And so these results actually showing that basically there is a negative impact that we saw in the previous results, the negative impact on the tradable sector. Okay. We also do further robustness check. That suppose we take the sample, and it may be argued by a critic that our sample is dominated by Russia and Saudi Arabia. These are the two countries which represent 26% of global oil production. So we drop them from the sample and then estimate the model. Okay. And the results are here in table 7, whereby we find the same consistent findings that the share of bank credit going to the manufacturing sector shrinks, whereas the share going to the non-tradable sector expands, consistent with the symptoms of the natural resource curse. So in conclusion, even when we start by invoking a flow of funds conceptual framework, in which the banking sector is so important in playing a critical role in channeling funds across the economy, we based on that to actually explore whether the sectoral bank credit shares of the tradable and non-tradable sectors in oil-rich economies characterize a natural resource curse, which will enable us to actually expand our understanding of the role of banks. We use a novel database that we have, or we construct a novel database on monthly observation on sector bank credit shares, as we mentioned, across the 16 countries, 1994 to 2017. We also find results which show a clear pattern of sector credit shares during oil boom, that these are symptomatic of the Dutch disease, showing that manufacturing sector shrinks and oil and services non-tradable expands. Okay, we subject these results to robustness in terms of the measure of the oil boom, in terms of the alternative definition of the tradable sector, and also in terms of the oil producers, by excluding the two large ones. The results are consistently the same. They signify that bank credit characterizes very important way of understanding the natural resource curse. Okay. So overall, the credit share patterns during oil booms constitute a channel through which the resource curse may affect tradable sector investment and performance. Okay. And this is consistent with the views about the financial resource curse, which has come into the literature. Okay. And there is a policy implication that in fact, I was thinking that one way of interpreting or conveying the advice of this paper to policymakers is saying, yes, you have discovered oil, you have an oil boom, but be careful. It might kill your banking sector. Okay. It might destroy your banking sector. It might actually kill the ability to export using manufacturers or using agriculture. And so the policy implication is that those oil producing countries may require some form of a preferential lending programs or alternative lending programs that tend to protect the tradable sector of the economy during those high episodes of financial resource cuts. Okay. There was something alluding to this in the work by Pinto and Fonato, but it was not based on exploring this understanding of bank credit share patterns. Of course, it has also been mentioned in the literature across the range of countries, but once again, this has not been based on evidence from credit allocation practices by banks across a large number of countries. What about future research? If we are to extend this work to what are the possible extensions? I think there is a need for a work to extend this to understand the behavior of credit patterns during booms of commodity countries. For example, to try to use alternative methods, perhaps quasi-experimental methods that are able to structure the economies into a control and intervention groups to be able to understand the ROH treatment effects in the way of how the credit patterns work out. That's possible one way of doing the investigation or undertaking. Use a period of oil price booms across the world as an anchor to this, and then try to find a partitioning way. But also there is need for being able to use bank level credit, bank level data, and or micro level, as we did in the previous work of 2020, because our data is still aggregated. And if this was taken back by bank across the world, which requires a huge amount of resources, that may be able to confirm or give us more insight into this channel. And also then able to control for things like foreign exchange exposure, market power, management quality, put in a governance, for example, variable of CO power or management quality. Okay. And that may be able to take us a little bit further along this journey. I'm sorry I've taken so long, Chair, but thank you very much for bearing with me for the extra 8 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
And let me also say my colleagues, Akin, John, and Kayode in the audience. Maybe I think they will come in the discussion as we continue. Yeah, thank you.
They are ready to answer tough questions, I know.
Exactly.
So, so welcome other co-authors, and thanks, Victor, for a very comprehensive presentation as far as I can see. So I listened very intensively. I think I learned a lot. And I'm sure in the audience, so we have a lot of experts in developing finance, African countries, oil, commodity related research. So I'm now collecting some questions. So if you have any questions or comments, so you can either raise your hands, e-hands, and or you can put that on the chat. So I have already seen two hands. So I think Jaydeep, you are the first one. So Jaydeep, could you please ask your question? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Victor. This is and thanks for this was a very interesting paper. So I'm thinking a lot about, like, in the hour that you presented, there's so many things that come to mind from it in terms of policy implications. So I was just wondering this. I mean, because you've gone down into the sort of the bank level, sector level analysis, I was wondering if there's some value in terms of, like, I've got 2 or 3 different thoughts, so I don't want to take too much time. So if other people want to come in, I'll stop whenever you tell me, Hong. But firstly, about in terms of the interest rate policy. So what about central bankers? If they're aware of this implication, why is it not possible for them to lower interest rates in a sort of targeted way to not have this currency effect take place? So for example, to lower interest rates, but to raise sort of capital requirements on consumer lending, at the same time. So that would kind of transform the bank's incentives to lend to certain sectors more than to others, and it would also make investment sort of more attractive in the industry from the cash flows that are coming in. Secondly, I was just wondering if the next sort of corollary to this is that bank performance gets worse a little while later because the loans were given to the wrong sectors and they start to go into non-performing status. So that was another kind of question I had. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this, so I'm going to leave these two for now, and I'll follow up more later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jaideep. Victor, would you like to answer question before we pick up another one?
Yeah.
Which way do you
Sure,
like?
sure. No. I think let's say continue the conversation whereby I respond. And yeah, I think you are right, Jaideep, that central banks could well play an important role in anticipating the impact of the oil booms on the economies by changing interest rates. You see, in the classical Dutch disease symptom, it is the exchange rate that appreciates. Okay, and if the exchange rate is appreciating, for example, a rise in the interest rate will actually mean that the exchange rate is appreciating, becoming much more capital flows. The medicine would make the disease worse. Okay, and if the central bank before they cut the base rate, they would be advised, of course, in terms of how this will affect the rest of the economy. We do have a monetary policy variable in the model, but maybe we don't infer so much from it. But I think the question there would be exploring a little bit more the potency of monetary policy in mitigating the adverse effects of the oil boom shock on the credit lending behavior. Yeah, I think that's we will definitely throw a little bit of more light on this in the paper, because that's a real problem, and it has implications for managing the natural resource costs. I think I agree with the lags. We could not experiment with the as many lags as possible, because as you lag this data, the more you go into, you have get disappearing residuals as your time tends to infinity. But I think maybe we need to also make comments on what happened in the lag structure, simply because we see that the booms tend to affect the divergence between spot prices and the futures prices differently. But maybe, Chair, can I call upon if any of my colleagues would like to add something on here?
Yes,
feel free, please. Or if not, we can go to the next one, and they can come in when they wish. Yeah.
Yeah, Jaideep, are you happy with? Well, you can continue if you.
No, thank you.
Okay.
That exactly. I guess I have more questions, but I'll leave them for like when we meet. So,
please.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And now I should call up Andy, please. I know you are an expert in the field, so let's see what's the question you have.
No, thank you very much, Victor. Very, very interesting presentation. Interesting question. Good question. Definitely scope for more work in this area, looking at the financial aspects of resource wealth for sure. I'm just going to challenge one assumption that you're making in your analysis, which is your assumption that the service sector represents non-tradables. That might have been true 30 or 40 years ago, but these days services are very much traded. Now, not all services are traded. There are certainly forms of non-traded services, but now lots of services are traded. So I'm not sure this sort of convenient assumption that the manufacturing sector is tradable and the service sector is non-tradable is really applicable these days. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I very much agree with that observation, quite rightly so. Having done quite many papers with Kilian and Ryan on trading financial services. Trading services could be accounting services, could be medical services, as long as these services firms are able to go across border. Then they are tradable. I think we should be, yes, you're quite rightly, we should be careful in pointing out which aspects of the services sector are non-tradable and which ones are, so that we can have that, kind of very well qualified. And of course, if the data allows this, I think actually the data now, especially anchored data, would be available in showing the segregated nature of services, and so we could possibly actually redefine that data to focus on those aspects that are not tradable, and therefore to be able to show, because we're interested in that kind of dichotomy, trying to be faithful to the Dutch disease classification of how it affects the tradable sector vis-a-vis the non-tradable sector. But I agree with the observation 100%. Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I raised my hand. I want to make the most of the opportunity that I'm sharing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And since I listened this very carefully today, actually, Victor, the topic is so interesting. And I'm also myself I'm also thinking about this resource curse problem. So I have 3 comments or maybe some questions. So the first one is actually on that story. So you are telling the story about resource curse. So normally, we see that the more resources some countries have, it is not necessarily that they developed well. So the economic performance is not positively corresponding to, how much resources they have, which is puzzling. So instead, we got some negative connection, for example, in African countries. So the first question I have is that how you think you answered this question? The reason why I ask this is because I saw so the logic is, they are rich in resources, in oil. When the oil market is very good, is in boom, they can sell more at a higher price. So the export revenue, they receive more, and those revenue can come back to the domestic countries so that we see the larger or more supply of capital. And that should be good.
Yeah.
And you assume those money goes to the real activities through the banking sector, right? So that's the reason why you checked the share, basically the structure of bank lending and the sector distribution, let's say that way.
Yeah.
So my question is whether or not this credit share is really, really telling the story of resource curse problem. So for example, manufacturing sector, as a result of booming, we saw something like a manufacturing sector has got, was affected negatively in terms of their credit, right? So, but that may be maybe caused by some other factors rather than this market booming, right? So that's my first question. So I was wondering, why did you check this credit share rather than directly use, let's say, the performance indicators of sectors? So that's my first question. So if you say, okay, the more the booming is negatively related to the performance of the manufacturing sector, which is more real sector. So I probably would say, yes, you are telling the story of resource curse problem. So that's my first comments or question. So why don't you just check the performance of each relevant sectors? And then you can use the banking sector as the intermediary or a channel through which this oil booming can work on the real economy. So that's my first comment. My second one is on your second two-stage list square. I think you got some very nice in the IWay, but in your first stage estimation, you only have those two IVs. I didn't see other factors that affect the market booming. But what about, for example, I'm thinking about the new discovery of stock, of resources, let's say that way. So what are the other factors? Do you think there are other factors that you should put in the first stage estimation? And by doing so, you can make your fitted value more accurate. And that's something that I'm thinking. And the last point that I have is on the policy implications. So again, on the manufacturing and linking this with the resources, oil market, etc., etc. So I'm thinking this may be for the policy that we should people are now talking about, processing, okay? And that is because in many resource-rich countries, for example, African countries, they have a lot of resources, but they do not have the processing. They do not have anything that they make the connection between those resources and the manufacturing process. So if policies can set up to encourage the processing to, you add more value when you have this processing, processing activities so that, therefore the booming can bring in some more revenue, and that revenue can be taken back to the manufacturing sector. So that's something that probably we can think in terms of the policy implications. But that's my comments and questions. I hope, you understand where I am coming from. Thank you.
Yeah. Very, very, very welcome, Hong, and very good comments. All the three comments are very useful and relevant. And the first is about the story of the paper. And you're absolutely right. We want to put the story in the context of the role of banks. Okay. And this is why I shared with you this a simple table. I hope you can see it right now, which basically tries to underpin the way in a flow of funds conceptual framework, the role of banks, or here as the financial corporations as banks. And basically the argument being that if the banks are inefficient in intermediating any resources, then of course it undermines the whole viability of the economy. And so, in fact, that's why I was saying that the story would be a country discovers oil and very soon gets an oil boom. Okay. The expectations by those in government and those people watching that country or investors would be that this country is now going into high liquidity, that they're gonna expand, maybe grow, expand infrastructure, enable a business to expand, expand manufacturing, expand agriculture, and so forth. But you see, the paper of Anthony Venables in 2016 was asking the question, why has it been so tricky? Why has it really been difficult to translate the oil booms into development? Okay, because this is the observation of what has happened. And I even would go further. The previous paper I did with my colleagues here was that the oil booms were actually not translating into bank productivity. Because here you see the expectations are that if the oil revenues are flowing into the economy, whether they are going into government as revenue, whether it is tax revenues from those oil discoveries they are going in, there will be a lot of resources. The resources will be going, of course, into the banking sector. The flows of this are going to either the central bank or the commercial banks. So, in the standard intermediation role, the banks have resources. The identity of the bank, the identity of any commercial bank, is basically equity plus deposits translates into loans and the purchases of securities. So any of these resources should be into intermediation, should be translated into further loans into the various sectors of the economy. And this is where the problem happens. This is where natural resources can kill the banking sector and can undermine the growth of the various sectors, especially here, the tradable sector. And this is why this paper is going right into the heart of at what level does the oil resource flows hurt the economy. And the argument here, it is through that role of intermediation, the extending of loans to government, loans to households, loans to farms, and maybe loans to the rest of the world. And the loans to companies are for, we assume, are for production rather than loans to households, which may be for consumption. Okay. So it's the distinction between the consumption loans, people may buy Mercedes-Benz, build big houses, may do what. But it is the loans we're interested in that go into the production process, that go into agriculture and manufacturing. And that is why we are showing the challenge is that why is it the case that when countries are experiencing these loans, these booms, the oil booms, the share of bank credit allocation of by the bank into the various sectors contracts with respect to those sectors that would otherwise produce growth. Manufacturing, in this case, in our test, and also agriculture. Why is it that the share going into those sectors is contracting and therefore symptomatic of that disease? This is the whole contention of the storyline. It's so saying these oil booms, those resources that flow in, compare the literature where they were looking only at exchange rate depreciation, exchange rate appreciation. We acknowledge, yes, exchange rate appreciation may happen. That's taken for granted. That has been documented for the last 20 years. Our new insight is that watch what is happening in the banking sector. In the banking sector, intermediating the resource flows from oil booms. And we find it is not rightly. Okay. The intermediation might be going to consumption, but that will not grow the economy. It is intermediation that grows the production sector. That is our story. Now, your comment number 2 was about the estimation of the when we are deriving the two instruments, we could include other factors. Yes, I agree. We could include other factors, and we shall try to see whether it creates a change, because then you have a full identification. On the policy implication, those are important in policy implication you mentioned. But for me, I think the first, for us in our work, we are trying to say the first implication is that, try to watch what is happening in the banking sector, because you might actually have a shrinking banking sector or a risky banking sector just simply because you are awash with liquidity from oil booms, and that will not work. Okay, and that is how. So the way the oil boom with revenues, tax revenues, as well as actual direct revenues should be managed is an important component of that. The component of that, yeah. And so yes, the policy implication will. Maybe when we use bank level data, we'll have policy implications that appeal to how bank managers should intermediate the revenue from oil booms, because the banks will be awash with the liquidity. How do they do? There are two options basically in standard banking literature. They can use it for on lending, and that's the channel we are using. There's actually another extension of this paper where banks are using the money to buy securities, treasury bills, and government paper, government bonds. That we haven't explored.
Great. Thank you, Victor. Yeah, your co-authors, I'm very curious to hear from them.
Let me see who is around. I can't see participants from my window.
I saw actually John is here.
Unless I stop sharing.
John, Dr. Ebireri.
Oh, John is here. John is here.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
How do you think about our question?
Yeah. Actually, John is here, and Kayode is here as well. Maybe Akin is still teaching. Maybe.
Good afternoon.
If you want to come in, that is
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Okay. Great to see you.
Good to see you, John. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I just be conscious because I got my son in the background here. He's making lots of noise, so that's why I've been a bit quiet. I'm thinking. I think some of the some of the questions that were asked, I think Professor Murinde has responded to them well. I just want to say something. I think that was the comment by Andy, and it's a valid point, and I think it's something we'll look into. But the problem with that is when we're collecting the data from the central bank bulletins, we may be able to get disaggregated data across, different sectors within services for a few countries, but for 16 countries, it will be difficult because most countries just collect data on credit to the service sector. And so that's why we're able to collect data at a very disaggregated level when taking a look at that particular sector. But yes, it is something that I agree with. I mean, a possibility is maybe to look at a few countries. There were a few, I can't remember specifically now unless I check, but there were a few countries whereby data was more disaggregated in terms of the collection. So we can explore that. But for most of them, it was just, credit to services. And that's why we had to stick with that. But his point was a very, very valid one, and we'll take note of that. You made a comment about, and which is true, why not look at the link, the link between the impact of boom on the performance of these sectors through intermediation. And yes, it's a valid point, and it's something we'll see if it's possible to do that, and we'll see if it's possible to do that. Well, but I'll take this comment back to our other colleague who's not here, and it's something we'll discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Victor, do you have more to add?
He's on mute.
Oh, Victor is you're
sorry.
You're muted.
Thanks, John, for those additional observations. Very, very helpful. Let me see whether Kayode wants to come in. If he wants to come in, since he's around. Yeah.
Oh.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you very
Good to
much.
see you.
And thanks to everyone who have obviously giving some feedback on the paper. I think there's not much to add really. Professor has discussed the intuition behind the idea that we were testing in the paper, and John has also commented additionally on some of the comments that were made and how the professor responded, which is very much in line with what we were thinking at the time. Obviously, the point is taken with regards to the way we handle the sectoral the sectoral and non-tradable sectors. I think that's a very important point. And if we were looking at that paper, the idea today, that will be something that we will look to improve on and take into account. One of the things we tried to do with the struggles we had with the data was, and John touched on this, we needed high frequency data that will be able to capture the interesting nature of the commodity markets. And because of what we're trying to the hypothesis we were investigating, we had to go with the data we had available. So we used and Prof has talked about the National Bank of Kazakhstan. So that was we had options but to be able to properly test this, we felt that data set was the most appropriate in terms of the frequency that we needed. But then there are lapses, and Professor Hong has rightly suggested that there are things that we could actually introduce, variables we could actually introduce into the empirical estimations, and this is very much a point that is taken. So, but just to let know that we appreciate the comments, and it's giving us, if we were to improve this paper, which we would look to as authors, if we go back to discuss, when we do so, these points that you have made today will be ones that will inform the way we take this paper forward. So thank you very much, Professor Hong, and professors who have given us this feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so maybe we should call more questions from the audience. So whether colleagues, do you still have any questions or comments?
I was expecting Bassam, Professor Bassam, to discuss the paper, since his research center, the Energy Research Center, looking at petroleum oil around the world, and maybe to give a comment on the data we used, whether it's the data that his center is also using, but it appears he's not being able to make it. Yeah. I'll follow him. I'll follow up with him bilaterally in terms of what database they're subscribing to. I think the other challenge has been to get bank level data across the world, because that micro data would be able even to show how bank managers are behaving when there is this exuberance about oil boom, the oil prices going up, sometimes higher than expected, and then how the bankers greet this unanticipated hike in oil prices and anticipated revenues from the oil sales. Now, we know how governments are greeting it, but we don't know how the bank managers are receiving that news. Yeah.
Yes, I think the development of the financial system of those countries, also the structure of the banking sector, probably they are also relevant. So if you want to make this from the perspective of the banking sector rather than the real economy, then probably yes. I think you have included some variables anyway. So are there any questions? Any more questions?
Well, maybe what I should add is to say that this paper is undergoing revision, and we shall incorporate the comments we received into the paper. We should be able to have a revised version by the end of November, just in case any participant in this seminar is interested to receive a full paper to read it and provide further comments. We shall have a revised iteration by the end of November.
Yeah, that's really, really good. So given that we do not have more questions or comments, so Victor, would you like to maybe use 1 minute to summarize? Do you still have anything? Otherwise, I can conclude this session, or you prefer to do that?
Yeah. Or you will conclude the meeting since you are chair. All I can say is that I want to thank you all for being able to come and participate in this research seminar. We have quite actually a couple of papers going on this particular topic of natural resource costs, oil booms, and the way it affects various components of the financial sector. They work with the Athena and now at University of Sussex and with the Sandrine at University of Paris is exploring various dimensions of bank level behavior. And we intend to build on this. So we keep on sharing with you. Because of that particular question is, if I look at countries that I follow very closely within the African continent and within Latin America and some of the Asian economies, the oil booms are not translating into any tangible development on the ground. How can this be the case? And how can it be reversed? How can we reverse the oil curse into the oil blessing? Yes. And that's what we are going into this. Yes, but thank you very much.
That's really very relevant topic. I think it's more important now, given the increasingly intense geopolitical conflicts. So I think that this issue is really, really important. So given that, so I would like to thank everyone who participated in the discussion, in raising the questions, and even listening to Victor's presentation. So I hope you got something and you can take some home today from this seminar. And thank you very much, Victor. Thank you and your co-authors for this very good work. I'm looking forward to hearing the good news. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Kayode.
Thank you.